Hey guys, my name is Aaliyah, and today I'm gonna do a summary of chapter 1 and just focus on the main points in the chapter 1 of the Radical Behaviorism for ABA Practitioners book. So chapter 1 just starts with a short vignette of Zoe, who is a consultant and a BCBA, to observe and discuss interventions in regards to Robert, who is a resident at the group home. And Robert has been engaging in uncooperative and disruptive behaviors, and he's bothering other residents, and he refuses to participate in scheduled activities. And Zoe wonders about the reasons for his lack of interest in the scheduled activities at the group home. And there are a few conflicting and counter arguments as to why Robert is uncooperative and disruptive, from Liz, the psychologist, Sharon, the social worker, and Zoe herself. So Liz's position is that she just believes that Robert just may simply not want to participate in the scheduled activities, which Zoe counters. And she believes that there's something that makes him prefer to bother his peers rather than participating. So there's something in his environment that is reinforcing his maladaptive behaviors. Sharon has a more free will stance. And her position is that Robert is free to choose one course of action over another. He's free to choose one thing to do or not to do. So in conclusion, Zoe backs off and she focuses on the nature of the consequences for his behavior that have been observed at the group home. Which leads us to if behavior is free or determined. So Johnston first discusses inside versus outside. So inside those internal factors and versus outside the factors and the actions that we can see. So it is what goes on inside the person that controls the behavior that others see, which is a more free will standpoint and approach. And there is some sort of mental activity that perceives public behavior and may override any influence that the environmental consequences might have on behaviors. So if this is true, then behaviors can be free of all outside influences, such as environmental or hereditary influences. So are we free to choose? Free will is simply the assumption that we can make choices that are free of external or outside influences, and they're not caused by anything that's environmental or biological. And Johnston goes on to discuss willpower and implies that our capacity to make ourselves do something is the result of something that's internal within us and is unique from person to person. He also touches on everyday language or phrases that we use, such as I changed my mind, I made myself do something, I decided to do something, or I was thinking about doing something. Those are just different phrases that we use every day that have a more free will approach to our behaviors. A more deterministic approach would be that we're understanding that our behaviors are influenced by environmental or hereditary factors, and that our behavior is determined by physical variables. A deterministic approach also discusses that free will is an illusion, but there are also some variables that we are usually unaware of. So for competing assumptions, Johnston touches on that there's no direct evidence to prove either side of free will or determinism. But if we try to prove free will, we have to look at showing that behavior can occur without any influence, which is impossible to eliminate the role of variables that could possibly be at play. And if we try to search for those influences, then that will require a more scientific approach. When we try to prove determinism, we are having to understand the physical causes of behavior and the influences of behavior. So which assumption is most useful? When you consider free will, you have to consider that behavior must be random and without explanation. No factors can influence the decisions, and if the choice is influenced by a similar experience or past contingencies, then that choice is not free. The limitations in research when we look at considering free will is the ability to resolve problem behaviors, because behaviors will be able to occur for no reason at all. When we consider determinism, we look at that all actions are the result of factors, and they can be multifaceted, they can be complex, and free of physical causation. Not free of physical causation. So some limitations in when you look at determinism are there's a lack of information that variables operate in a specific instance. And Johnston also goes on to discuss that scientists are parsimonious and they rely on well-established knowledge and evidence, such as evidence-based treatments as well. And just a few more issues that Johnston looks at are non-physical causation, responsibility, such as personal responsibility, and the relationship between responsibility and cultural values and choice. So with non-physical causation, if there are no physical dimensions, they cannot involve the same kinds of causation that apply within a physical event. With responsibility, like I said, personal responsibility, and he goes into discuss it as a deterministic approach and as a free will approach. So for free will, we're not responsible for our behavior in a scientific sense because the individual is not a controlling authority who makes decisions about his or her behavior that are independent of those physical variables. On the other hand, we look at responsibility in relationship to consequences. So we're responsible for our behavior because we have to live with its consequences. For example, Johnston gives in the book, if you're out drinking with your friends and you act in ways that could possibly offend them, saying nasty things or just being mean, they're less likely to invite you out again. So that'll be like not being able to avoid the social consequences of our actions and behaviors. When we look at responsibility and cultural laws and values, we look at abiding and violating those rules that are placed within our culture or in our home. And Johnston discusses behavior consequence contingencies, which are dependent relationship between responding and the environmental consequence itself, which often involves a response resulting in a reinforcer, like making behaviors less or more likely to occur. So, for example, if you have a teenage daughter, and she wants to go out, and you told her in the past, okay, Susie, if you go out and you have to be home by midnight, and if you're not home by midnight, you cannot go out for a month, and you will not have your iPhone for a month. Because that was a past contingency, Susie is more likely to comply and abide by the rules and the laws that were set. And she'll be home this time at midnight. Because in the past, she was home after midnight and she didn't have her phone and she wasn't able to go out. So obviously that made her behavior less likely to occur. So when we have a deterministic approach, we're accepting that the behavior is determined. And we assign the responsibility of that behavior to the sources of control in the actual physical environment that the behavior occurs. So we're holding individuals responsible for their behavior by specifying the consequences of certain actions. So meaning that if Susie is late and breaks her curfew, that we're specifying that she does not get to go out for a month and does not get her cell phone, which is an important contingency because it helps manage behaviors and it can lead to a decrease in those maladaptive behaviors. Johnston also looks at choice, choosing to or deciding in regards to behavior. And he wants us to look at and appreciate the outside factors that can be at play in all the choices that we make, such as he uses deciding to go to the movies. We'll say like, oh, I decided to go see this particular movie, but we don't look at the overall factors of what could be actually occurring. It could be, for example, somebody's recommendation, whether it's your friend, somebody you just ran into, or it could be a review you might have read from Rotten Tomatoes on a movie, and maybe you chose to go see a different one because the first movie you decided to go see didn't have great reviews. So that was just more so about appreciating the factors that can influence our behavior, which I thought was cool. So yes, our assumption is it's self-determined. So this just touches on if our behavior is determined, it means that your decision concerning where you stand regarding free will versus determinism is not your choice, but it is determined by various influences. And then he ends chapter 1 before the summary by discussing just different consequences for ABA practitioners that they face, because they speak with different clients and, you know, their families and the professionals that might counter their approach when it comes to looking at environmental factors, which can complicate ABA practitioners and which can make it more difficult to do interventions that can be important in changing and reducing the rates of a behavior. Which also brings us back to the vignette example that Johnston gives in the beginning of the chapter in regards to Robert and his disruptive behavior, and how Zoe was trying to look at what in his environment is reinforcing his behavior, what in his environment is making him more likely to bother his peers than go to scheduled activities at the group home. So, all that being said, after reading chapter 1 and listening to this video, where do you stand? Do you believe that behaviors are influenced by environmental and hereditary factors, or do you believe that we have the free will to make our own decisions and control our behaviors? Johnston ends the chapter emphasizing the importance of having a deterministic approach as a practitioner. Do you disagree or agree? Thanks, guys. Let me know if you have any questions about the video. Thanks.